Right, so we did leave off on page 67 in the last paragraph, but I was kind of just thinking with the opening remarks, like, and also with the new people we have on Zoom right now, we've actually got 8 people, and I know at least 4 of them are less than 6 months as well. So just want to do a little bit of a recap of what got us to page 67, exactly where we're at on 67. So what we've learned so far going through this book, in the doctor's opinion, first 3 chapters, we learned something about alcoholism, learned what an alcoholic was, so we could determine if we are one or not, to be able to make that admittance or to concede that we're alcoholic. What we learned in that is that we're powerless over alcohol, right? That was the term that they use up here as well on the 12 steps on the wall. We're powerless to control the amount we take. We're powerless to quit when we honestly want to. We can quit, but we can't stay quit. That's the problem with the alcoholic. Powerlessness. Second part, though, of that first step talks about our lives being unmanageable. And that's a very key piece that leads us up to where we are, because where we're at now, we're not even talking about alcohol. We're talking about this unmanageable life thing. And it's generally what I have seen, and it was true with myself, coming into AA the very first time, and every time I came in after that, until I got a hold of this thing, I realized I didn't come to stop drinking. That was not my goal. I rather enjoyed drinking myself until it didn't work anymore. I came here because, as the doctor put it, in the doctor's opinion, my problems piled up on me and become astonishingly difficult to solve. I was restless, irritable, discontent, filled with fear, guilt, shame, and remorse, just miserable, just miserable. And I come here and I get sober, right? Defined as not drunk. And I found myself still miserable. Now I'd go to a meeting and I'd feel good, and I'd leave that meeting and I'd go and flick myself on the rest of the world, and they'd inflict themselves on me, and then I'd get miserable again. But this time, when you're sober, the difference is I don't have the relief from alcohol to pick up to at least give me a little bit of ease and comfort. I'm just miserable all the time. So I kept bouncing in and out and in and out. What we learned as we moved on, we get to page 62 here. We find that what our real problem is selfishness and self-centeredness. That was on the first paragraph of 62. That, they say, is the root of our troubles. It's not the drinking. The root of our problem is selfishness and self-centeredness. And they go into talking about, on page 62, if you go into the second paragraph, it says that, so our troubles we think are basically of our own making. Oh, my unmanageable life is not the result of what everybody else has done to me. It's my own making. They arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though usually he doesn't think so. And then it says, above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. It says we must, or it kills us. What's going to kill us? Alcohol? Oh, no, not alcohol. Selfishness, self-centeredness. That is what is going to kill us. Whether it's through drinking or whether it's sober and suffering from untreated alcoholism, that kills us too, because we still have the selfishness. That's the problem. And it says that God will make that possible. We have an option. If we decide we want to run our own lives, He will let us run our own lives right into the grave, if that's what we choose to do. That's our choice. So that always leads to the thought, so we have to be less selfish about everything. We got to get rid of it, right? So we're not thinking about alcohol. Now we're focused. I got to get rid of selfishness. That's what's going to kill me. So then we think, well, maybe I can just try to be less selfish, right? I can probably do that. But the next sentence says, there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without His, with a capital H, without His aid. That means that we're just as powerless over getting rid of selfishness in all of its manifestations. We're just as powerless over that as we are of stopping drinking or controlling our drinking. We can't do it. The last sentence there, I'm sorry, 2 sentences up from the last says, neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by the wishing method or by the trying method. With our own willpower, we had to have God's help. Okay? So that's when we're forced into now looking at this idea that we have to get a conception of God, because we're beyond human aid, not only with alcohol, but also with this. So we're looking, we got into step 2, where we're looking to get this conception of God, find out that we can use our own conception. We do not need to consider another's conception. Our own conception, however limited, is good enough. In fact, it says you don't even have to believe in God. Although it says up here in the Cliff Notes that we came to believe, at least they put the word came to believe in there. Because when you read into the instructions, they say you don't even have to believe. You just got to be willing to believe. What does it mean to be willing? That just means I'm willing to go through this process and see what happens. But if you are so close-minded about the idea of God that, what did we call it? The OSUPs? Remember the obstinacy, sensitiveness, and don't tell me about God. I don't want to hear it. There's no God. If we're just that close-minded and that prejudiced, then there's nothing that AA has to offer us. There's nothing more that we can do. We can't move on. But if we do, and we understand that we need God's help, so now we've enlisted the power of God. We took step 3. We did the 3rd step prayer. What did we ask for? Relieve me of the bondage of self. Well, that's probably a good thing to ask for, seeming that we now understand that our root problem is selfishness. So that's what we're at. Relieve me of the bondage of self. That's what we're asking for. So if we're doing that now, we're asking God, we're listening to God. So why do we need to do any of the rest of this? Right? We're making contact. We're asking him. Right? Well, we find before we get to page 66, we're talking about this step 4 on page 64. You know, the last paragraph and go up one sentence says, being convinced, and that's where we need to be when we do step 4. We need to be convinced. We also saw that in step 2, I believe. We needed to be convinced that any life run on self-will could hardly be a success. Here they say that we need to be convinced that self, manifested in various ways, that is what defeated us. So now we're going to consider its common manifestations. And it talks about resentments being the number one deal, right? That's the one thing that's going to kill us, is resentment. So it's the number one offender. So we're looking at these things, and what we're doing is we're making this inventory, because what we find is that, I'm going to go back. Let me see, where was that at? Jump over to page 66. In the first full paragraph here, it says, it's plain that a life which includes deep resentment, that's the number one offender, leads only to futility and unhappiness. That means we can't have, isn't that what we had, was a life of unhappiness and futility? Okay, if we keep deep resentment, that's what our life's going to be. It's going to be futility and unhappiness. And it goes on to say, but with the alcoholic, whose hope, this is our hope. Remember, we were hopeless. Well, this is our hope, is the maintenance and the growth of a spiritual experience. So first we got to get it, spiritual experience. Then we're going to need to maintain it, and we're going to need to grow it. Okay, that's our only hope in Alcoholics Anonymous. So if that's our hope, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. We found that it's fatal. Well, why is that? Because it says when we harbor such feelings, these resentments, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. We are now blocked from God. We got to have his help. We are blocked with all these resentments inside of us. And then when we're blocked, the insanity of alcohol returns and we drink again. And with us, to drink is to die. So if we're to live, we have to live without anger. We have to be free of anger. To drink is to die. The insanity is going to come if we're blocked off from God. If you just think about that, if you've got done doing your 3rd step, and you know this resentments that we all have, they're going to kill us because they keep us blocked. How long should we wait to start working on removing that blockade? Yeah, actually, I think they gave us a time reference on that, didn't they? Didn't they use the words at once? At once is when we start doing it. This is why we do it at once. Because at any day, at any given time, no matter how we feel, if we're suffering from untreated addiction, we're in danger of drinking at any given moment, whether we think it or not. It's just a fact. It's going to happen. The time and place will come when we will drink again. So that's why we're doing steps 4 through 9. We need to remove these blockades. We need to remove all of the manifestations of self that have defeated us and that blocks us off from the sunlight of the Spirit. Does that make sense? That's why we're doing step 4. So when we're considering the manifestations, there's 4 things that it says that we're looking for. And this is going to be a written inventory that we're going to do. And this is going to be real, it says strenuous work. We're going to be looking at resentments. We're going to be looking at fears. We're going to be looking at our sex conduct, and we're going to be looking at harms done to others that are not related to the previous 3. Those are the things we're going to look for. All right. So the first thing we got into reading about was these resentments. And it makes sense that they listed that first, because it said it's the number 1 offender, right? It says so at the bottom of page 66, one paragraph up from the bottom, about midway in that paragraph, says, we began to see that the world and its people really dominated us. In that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, had the power to actually kill. So how could we escape? Well, the resentment's going to kill us. And if we're resentful at all these people, what they're saying is, it's really these people that we resent, they're dominating us. They're the ones that are blocking us in our own mind. As long as they're renting space there, we're blocked. They have the power to kill us. Even if it's their wrongdoing to me, it's going to kill me if I hang on to it. That's why we have to get rid of these things. So it says, how could we escape? And then we got into talking about how we deal with people going forward, right? So here's the thing. You go through steps 4 through 9, it could take a while to go through that. Could take a few months to go through that process, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter, but it's going to take a little while. Well, one thing we don't want, what we're trying to do is get a clean slate. We're trying to identify the things that have been blocking us. We're going to ask God to remove those things. And then we're going to go out and we're going to make amends for every part that we had to do with any one of those things. Anything that we had done wrong to other people based on when I made actions based on stuff, we're going to clean it up. And what does that give us at the end? A clean slate. Open communication with God, so I can do steps 10 and 11. I can ask God what he wants me to do, and I can respond in doing it. Right? That's the whole idea here. Well, during that process of doing steps 4 through 9, we certainly don't want more stuff to build up, right? By the time you get done, you could have a whole other list of crap that's built up, right? So they're telling us right now, this is how you're going to deal with people when you get angry. See, before, it's like we didn't have a solution. We just acted, I guess, almost like out of instinct. You offend me, the hair on the back of my neck goes up and rah. I generally don't even think of what I'm saying or doing, but I'm lunging back. Well, now we're told, think about that, because that's what's going to kill you. And this is the course that they said that we're going to do. We're going to start looking at these people as if they're sick also. See, alcoholics aren't the only ones that have selfishness, although we're told that we're an extreme example of self-will run riot. There's many examples of self-will run riot out there amongst us in the world that are not alcoholics, even extreme examples. And so start looking at them from that perspective. This is a sick person. And if I look at them as they're sick, then the next question is, how would I treat somebody who's sick? Would I lunge back at them? What if I had a parent that had Alzheimer's, and sometimes they can get pretty hectic and frantic and get angry? Am I going to just lash back at them? No, they're sick. I got to work with them. I got to understand they're sick. That's what they're saying. We need to look at them as they're sick and treat them that way. And the question becomes, how can I be helpful to them? Now, that thought had never went through my mind in my entire life when somebody offended me. But that's what they're saying we need to do. This is how we keep anger and resentment from accumulating in our life. So it says we avoid retaliation and argument. So now we're getting into our list, and it told us what we're looking for here in the list. We're going to start looking at, we looked at so far in the resentments, who we're resentful at, what happened, why we're resentful at them, what it affected in me. And if there's anything that I did, anything at all, even a small part, even if theirs is huge and mine's, is there anything that I did that might have set that ball in motion? And then what character defects were involved with my actions? Because they're manifestations of self. When I react, I'm going to look and start seeing. We want to really see how we act, because it's really not to do with the people anymore. It has to do and it's not even what they did. Remember, if you go back to that list, like I think the first thing was Mr. Brown. Guy's upset at him because he's making moves on my wife, right? He's interested in my wife. So you would think, well, if it was Mr. Green making moves on my wife, I'd be just as mad at him. So it's not necessarily Mr. Brown, right? But then it also goes a little further. It's not even that he's making a move on my wife. It's what is that affecting in me? Well, what happens if he gets with my wife? What's everybody going to think of me? And, how's that going to affect my sex relations? I won't be getting any of that. How's that going to affect my pride? So it's not even what they did. It's when these things are affected, these securities, when they're affected, I respond out of selfishness and self-centeredness, which begins the whole spiral of people lashing back. And then I remain resentful. I'm blocked off from God. And I just start living. That's the cause of the restless, irritable, and discontentedness. That's the cause of it, right? So if we want to break that cycle, if we get rid of if we can be sober and not restless, irritable, and discontent, if we can get sober and get happy, then we'll never be thinking about the ease and comfort from a drink because we already got ease and comfort. And this is the course. This is what we have to do. So we're listing these things. We just got done with reading about the resentment inventory. And the last before the last paragraph where we left off on 67, but one sentence before it, notice it says, we admitted our wrongs honestly. So we wrote down honestly what happened, but it adds to it. And it says, and we're willing to set these matters straight. And we're going to get into that more when we get into step 9, and we're willing to set these matters straight. Now, we might not want to set these matters straight, but it goes back to what we learned earlier. Alcohol can be the great persuader. It's either you're going to have that life or you're going to be willing to do this. And the reason I'm willing to do this is to save my own life because I don't want to be miserable anymore. I don't want to die from alcohol. Has it beat you up that bad that you're willing? And it tells us later in the beginning of step 9, it was agreed in the beginning that we were willing to go to any lengths for victory over this deal. So are we willing? That's a point that they make there. So now we're going to go on to fear. It says, notice that the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties with Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, the employer, and the wife. And even with the short list, I'm just reading those names. These are the closest people to him. Usually the number one people on our list of resentments are the people closest to us. He's talking about his wife. He's talking about his boss. He's talking about his employer. Closest people to us. I mean, I haven't met an alcoholic yet that doesn't know who he's resentful at. And generally it's the people closest to him that come to mind first. Then we have to start digging a little further into our past to find other people, but it's usually the closest ones to us. It says this fear. It says this short word somehow touches about every aspect of our lives. It was an evil and corroding thread, and the fabric of our existence was shot through with it. And I don't know about you, but the first time I did this fear inventory, I had a tough time with it because I thought, like, well, what am I afraid of? There's not a whole lot I'm afraid of. I mean, honestly, even at that point, I wasn't even afraid of death. I mean, to me, that was a viable solution to my problem. So I thought, I'm not a very fearful person. So I had to have this explained to me a little bit deeper. Because if you go back and they tell us, you start looking, you're going to see that word fear is bracketed on page 65 and all these inventory things. Fear, fear, fear. Okay, let's go back to Mr. Brown gets with my wife. What's everybody going to think about me? What's going to happen with my personal relations? I'm afraid of what's going to happen there. Mr. Brown's trying to take my job. I might lose my job. I'm afraid that he's going to take my job. How am I going to take care of my family? This is all about fear. And fear, as it's been explained to me, which really helped me a lot with this part of the inventory. And again, what I'm telling you, I will note, because if I don't, Wynn will note it for me. This is not in the book, but what I've learned is fear generally comes from 3 places. And by looking at those 3 places, it helped me to identify them. It's either I'm afraid that I'm going to lose something that I have, like my wife or my job. I'm afraid I'm not going to get something that I want, like that promotion, whatever it might be. Or I'm afraid of what they're going to do to me when they find out what I did. So if you think of it from those terms, it opened up a much larger list for me when I started thinking of it that way. So that's it. Every aspect of our lives is there. It says that fear, it set in motion trains of circumstances which brought us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve. But did we not ourselves set the ball rolling? Sometimes we think fear ought to be classed with stealing. It seemed to cause more trouble. So what are they talking about? Well, let's just play this out. Mr. Brown making the moves on my wife trying to take my job. I'm fearful of that happening. So how did my fear cause trains of circumstance happen? Well, how did I respond to that? Well, I'd probably go over there and knock the shit out of Mr. Brown once I found out about it, right? Show him. And then what's the trains of unfortunate circumstances that happened to me? Well, I probably wound up in jail. That's a pretty unfortunate circumstance. Trains of circumstances based on self-will caused worse infliction than what I had prior to it. That's what we're talking about. That's just one example to think about. So we reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper, even though we had no resentment in connection with them. Okay, so these are fears without resentment because we already got the resentment ones done. You don't need to repeat them again here. We asked ourselves, first thing on the list, why do I have it? Why do I have this fear? Wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? And that's what all this is about. Remember, we're talking about what does it affect in me? Whether it's my financial security, whether it's my sex relations, whether it's my personal relations, my ambitions, whatever. These are things, if I'm running life on self-will, these are things that I have to protect myself from. And in most circumstances, I have no control over them. Mr. Brown makes a move with my wife and she goes back. I have no control over it. I'm living in constant fear because I'm the one who has to control all these things. And I can't. We have no way of doing it. Self-reliance, it failed us. Self-reliance was good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. Some of us had great self-confidence. Anybody have great self-confidence? I've had great self-confidence, but it didn't fully solve the fear problem or any other problem. And when it made us cocky, it was worse. So perhaps there's a better way. We think so. So if we're not going to rely on self, it says we're now on a different basis. And this is from doing step 3 that put us on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying on God now. What does that mean? I find out Mr. Brown's trying to make a move on my wife. I do what I can about that. But if I can't, I'm relying on God, save me from being angry, because that's going to kill me, and just show me what I need to do. Not me just responding. Ask. And I tell you, when we get into the next couple of chapters, we're going to see that word repeated over and over and over in here. We asked, we ask, we ask, we asked. That's code word for pray. That is how we rely on God. We ask what we're supposed to do. We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. We are in the world to play the role he assigns. We read that in step 2, didn't we? He's going to be the director. We're going to be his children, right? Just to the extent we do as we think he would have us and humbly rely upon him, he enables us to match calamity with serenity. What a statement and what a promise there is there. Remember, the deal in step 3 was it says that he will provide what we need if we stick close to him and perform his work well. He's going to provide everything I need, but I got to do something too. I've got to stick close to him and perform his work well. And it says here that to the exact extent, so it's kind of like a scale, to the exact extent that I am relying upon him, humbly relying upon him and doing what I think he would have me do, will he allow me to match calamity with serenity, no matter what whatever my ex-wife or my wife is doing. She might be my ex-wife by that point, but whatever she's doing, whatever Mr. Brown's doing, I can match calamity with serenity. I never found a way of doing that. When I reacted out of resentment and anger, there's never a point I look back and say, boy, I'm glad I did that. I just matched calamity with serenity. Never walked away with serenity. This is how we match calamity with serenity. We never apologize to anyone for depending on our Creator. We laugh at those who think spirituality is the way of weakness. Paradoxically, it's the way of strength. The verdict of the ages is that faith means courage. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God, never apologize for God. Instead, we let him demonstrate through us what he can do. We're not going to demonstrate through us anymore. We're going to let God, we're going to ask what we need to do, and then we're going to demonstrate his power through us of what we could do. Didn't we read that in the 3rd step prayer? Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear, not victory over them is going to make me have peace of mind. That victory over him may bear witness to other people of his power, his love, and his way of life. Let him demonstrate through us. But of course, we got to get rid of that blockade in order for that to happen. So get this. This is just like in resentment. It told us how to deal with it going forward. Now with our fear list, how do we deal with fear going forward? And I would underline this. We ask, there's that code word again. We ask him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what he would have us be. That's how we're going to deal with fear. We feel fear creep up. We're going to ask him to remove it and direct our attention to what he would have us be. And how long does it take that to work? There's those two words again. At once, we commence to outgrow fear. Imagine that. That's how we outgrow fear. Reliance upon God, trusting God. Ask him to remove it. What would you have me do? Very simple. Isn't that simple? Simple stuff. Never occurred to me in my lifetime, but simple stuff. Not the easiest thing to do, especially when we're emotionally charged. Like resentment and anger, the more I've found with any emotion, but especially resentment and anger. But with any emotion, the more emotionally charged we are about a situation, the less our judgment becomes, right? So although we know we need to do this, this is a lifetime of practice, right? It's a lifetime of practice. So now about sex. It's our third list. Many of us needed an overhauling here, but above all, we tried to be sensible on this question. It's so easy to get way off track. Here we find human opinions running to extremes, absurd extremes perhaps. One set of voices cries that sex is a lust of our lower nature, a base necessity of procreation. Then we have the voices who cry for sex and more sex, who bewail the institution of marriage, who think that most of the troubles of the race are traceable to sex causes. They think we do not have enough of it or that it isn't the right kind. We all see that. They see its significance everywhere. One school would allow a man no flavor for his fare, and the other would have all of us on a straight pepper diet. We want to stay out of this controversy. We do not want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. It's also good information for when you're working with somebody. We stay out of that. We're not the arbiter. We're going to see who the arbiter is later. It says we all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. But what could we do about them? In our step work on the paper, we're going to review our own conduct over the years past. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? In every relationship, that's what we'll look for. Where had I been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? Whom had we hurt? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? So even our sex conduct, if we're having an affair, we're affecting not only our wife, but our family. And it'd be easy to say, well, they didn't know about it. But see, we're living a double life, and we're doing that. We're taking time and affection away from them that they deserve to have. Right? We hurt other people. We need to look at this very carefully. Where were we at fault? That's what we're looking for. On the paperwork, it's who did we hurt? That's number one. And what did we do? And what should we have done instead? We got this all down on paper and looked at it. So once we do that, it says in this way, we try to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. So that's how we're going to get our ideal, is by laying this stuff out. And I would underline this. We subjected each relation to this test. If you're not sure if the name needs to go on the list, this is very simple. Was it selfish or not? Later, we're going to see that is how we treat every problem we have. If we're doing step 10 and we're going through, had I been selfish, dishonest, resentful, or fearful? If I'm not sure, here's the deal. Was it selfish or wasn't it? Well, yeah, I got in an argument with my wife, but, she was wrong. Okay, my response, was it selfish or not? Not was it justified? Not can I minimize it? Is it selfish or not? It's that simple. And that's what we're going to do with these names. Was my action selfish or not? That's the test. Once again, we asked God to mold our ideals and help us to live up to them. So who molds our ideals? Not our sponsor or mentor, not ourselves. I don't mold my ideals. We're going to ask God to mold our ideals. We remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised or loathed. But underline whatever those ideals turn out to be after we ask Him, we must, underline must, be willing to grow towards it. We must be willing to make amends where we have done harm, provided that we do not bring about still more harm in doing so. That brings me to another good point. One of the most common things here is while we are willing to go to make these amends, and I have worked this, no, this didn't happen to me, but it's happened with several people I've worked with in the past where they want to get a jump on this deal, right? So they're going to go ahead and they're writing this, and it's just eating them up. Just eating me up, man. I had an affair with my wife, and I got to get this out. I got to get free. So they go blah, and they just blurt it out to their wife and give all the details. This is what happened before we even got a chance to sit down and talk about this stuff, right? So what wound up happening is exactly, he didn't read this part where it said that we must be willing to make the amends, provided we do not bring still more harm in doing so. So now what are you doing? Now you're going to have to make amends for making your amends. Now you just created a whole new ball. You got interest that just got compounded on top of your amends. So we don't do that. But we also have to be very careful, and we'll talk about this too, that we don't also use it, well, nope, I can't tell her because I don't want to hurt her. Like, yeah, you got to go through that, right? Right, and use that as an excuse. So let's see what directions they give us about this. It says, in other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. In meditation, we ask, here's the word again, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. So we don't decide what we're to do about each specific matter. Who do we go to? God. We ask. Look, we're either going to rely on God or we're not. It's made it very clear all through here. And I go back to the statement they made in step 2. God's either everything or He's nothing. If we made our mind up that He's everything, then it's time for us to be relying. We have to start doing this. It's the only way this is going to work. We ask what we should do about each specific matter, and the right answer will come if we want it. What if we don't want it? We've learned something about this too. What if we don't want it? What if I'm not? We ask God to make us willing. Right? I'm not willing. God, make me willing. Got to ask. Continue relying. God alone can judge our sex situation. That's the arbiter. Counsel with persons is often desirable, and that's where you might want to talk to your mentor or other people that are recovered in AA about certain situations. But, and I underline this, we let God be the final judge in our meditation, right? We realize that some people are as fanatical about sex as others are loose, so we avoid hysterical thinking or advice. We avoid advice. We know in this meeting we avoid opinion and we avoid advice. Relying on God. I rely on God. Don't come to me for advice. I can't manage my own life. What would make you think I can manage yours? Right? Suppose we fall short of the chosen ideal and stumble. Does that mean we're going to get drunk? Some people tell us so. But this is only a half-truth. It depends on us and our motives. If we are sorry for what we have done and have the honest desire to let God take us to better things, we believe we will be forgiven and we'll have learned our lesson. However, if we are not sorry and the conduct continues to harm others, we are quite sure to drink. We are not theorizing. It's not just our opinion. These are facts out of our own experience. This is how they've seen this work. To sum up about sex, we earnestly pray for 1, the right ideal, for 2, guidance in each questionable situation, 3, for sanity, 4, for the strength to do the right thing. Underline this, if sex is very troublesome, we throw ourselves the harder into helping others. We think of their needs and work for them, and this takes us out of ourselves. It quiets the imperious urge when to yield would mean heartache. If we have been thorough about our personal inventory, we've written down a lot. We've listed and analyzed our resentments. We have begun to comprehend their futility, and we've begun to comprehend their fatality. We've commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. We have begun to learn tolerance, patience, and goodwill towards all men, even our enemies, for we look on them as sick people. We've listed the people we've hurt by our conduct and are willing to straighten out the past if we can. In this book, you read again and again that faith did for us what we could not do for ourselves. We hope you are convinced, there's that word again, we hope you are convinced now that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked you off from him. If you've already made a decision, step 3, and an inventory of your growths or handicap, step 4, oh, look at that. Now we finally made a good beginning. Remember page 19 said that elimination of drinking was a beginning? And then step 3 said that once we've done it, we've still made a beginning. Now we've done step 4. Now we've made a good beginning. We're still in the beginning. We're still in the beginning. We made a good beginning. And that being so, you swallowed and digested some big chunks of truth about yourself. And that ends chapter 6.